The first thing she did was take my hand. The second thing she did was lean close enough for me to smell winter air in her hair and whisper, "You're my husband for the next 3 hours." I had never seen her before in my life. I was 38 years old, recently divorced, carrying my father's ashes in a plain wooden box inside my suitcase, and riding a mountain train toward a hometown I had spent 15 years trying to forget. Romance was the last thing on my mind. So when the beautiful stranger beside me tightened her fingers around mine and glanced nervously toward the aisle, I should have pulled away. Instead, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I squeezed her hand back. Before we continue, if you enjoy heartfelt romance stories, second chances, and emotional journeys about ordinary people finding hope when they least expect it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Dream Porch Tales. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel and where our wonderful viewers are joining us from. Her name, I soon learned, was Eloan Hart. She had boarded the train in Denver wearing a burgundy wool coat, carrying one small suitcase and the expression of someone trying very hard not to cry in public. I had noticed her only because she kept checking the glass reflection behind us. Now, with her hand still wrapped around mine, she whispered that a man named Curtis Vale had followed her onto the train. He wasn't a dangerous stranger, exactly. That almost made it worse. He was the son of the wealthiest land developer in her hometown, a man her mother adored, a man everyone assumed she would marry. Eloan had ended their engagement 6 months earlier after realizing that Curtis didn't love her so much as he loved deciding who she should become. He had controlled her money, criticized her work, and slowly separated her from friends. That morning, after learning she was traveling home for her grandmother's birthday, he had appeared at the station insisting they talk things through. She had panicked when she saw him board. I looked down at our joined hands. "And your solution was to marry a stranger?" I murmured. For the first time, something like humor flickered across her face. Temporarily. Then footsteps sounded behind us. Eloan's entire body stiffened. A tall man in an expensive gray coat stopped beside our seat and stared at me. Without thinking, I lifted Eloan's hand and rested it against my chest. She leaned into my shoulder. Curtis asked who I was, and I heard myself say, "Her husband." The lie came out so calmly that even I almost believed it. Curtis's face changed. He muttered something about Eloan making another mistake and walked toward the observation car. Only when the connecting door closed did she breathe again. "You didn't have to do that," she said. I stared through the window at the snow-covered peaks and thought about how many times in my own life I had needed someone to do something they didn't have to do. My ex-wife, Marissa, had left 2 years earlier after 10 increasingly quiet years of marriage. There had been no betrayal, no screaming, no dramatic courtroom battle. Just 2 people who had become strangers while sharing the same refrigerator. She wanted a bigger life in Seattle. I wanted to keep repairing old houses, calling my father every Sunday, and pretending I wasn't terrified of starting over. When she left, I buried myself in work. Then my father got sick, and I kept telling myself I would visit next week. There was always another roof to finish, another invoice to send, another excuse. He died on a Tuesday morning before I reached the hospital. Eloan listened without interrupting. That surprised me. Most people become uncomfortable around grief and rush to cover it with advice. She simply kept holding my hand. When I finally told her I was taking my father's ashes back to Bellwether, Colorado, to scatter them near the river where he taught me to fish, her eyes widened. "Bellwether?" she asked. "That's where I'm going." I turned toward her. Bellwether was a tiny mountain town with one grocery store, a red brick schoolhouse, a diner that still served pie on chipped ceramic plates, and fewer than 3,000 people. It seemed impossible that 2 strangers could meet on a train hundreds of miles away and both be heading toward the same forgotten dot on the map. Eloan had grown up there too, though 6 years behind me in school. Her grandmother, June Hart, owned the old Bluebird Bakery on Main Street. I remembered it immediately. My father used to buy cinnamon rolls there every Saturday, always pretending they were for me. Eloan smiled when I told her, but then her smile faded. The bakery was failing. June was 79, the roof leaked, and medical bills had eaten through the family savings. Curtis's father wanted to buy the entire block for a luxury resort project. Eloan had come home to help her grandmother, even though it meant abandoning a promising interior design job in Denver. "Everyone thinks I'm throwing my life away," she said softly. "Maybe I'm just tired of living a life that looks impressive from the outside and feels empty when I close the door." Those words stayed with me. For the next 2 hours, the pretending became strangely unnecessary. We talked about everything people usually hide on first meetings: failed marriages, frightened parents, childhood dreams, and the guilt of arriving too late. Somewhere beyond Glenwood Canyon, snow began falling in thick white sheets. The train slowed. Eloan fell asleep with her head against my shoulder, and I sat completely still, afraid that moving even an inch might break something fragile I had forgotten existed inside me. I watched our reflection in the darkening window and saw what Curtis had seen: two people who looked as if they belonged together. The thought frightened me more than the lie. When we finally reached Bellwether after sunset, Curtis disappeared without another confrontation. Eloan released my hand on the platform, and the cold rushed into the empty space between my fingers. 3 hours, she said with a sad little smile. "You kept your promise." Then an elderly woman came hurrying through the snow, wrapped in a blue knitted scarf. June Hart hugged Eloan, looked at me, and burst into tears. She remembered my father. More than that, she told me something I had never known. During the final months of his life, my father had been repairing the bakery roof for free whenever his health allowed. He said his boy would finish anything he couldn't, June whispered. I could have left the next morning. I had planned to scatter the ashes and return to Denver by Sunday. Instead, I stayed. At first, I told myself it was because of my father's unfinished promise. I repaired the roof, replaced rotten window frames, and called old contractor friends for donated materials. Eloan redesigned the bakery interior using reclaimed wood from my father's abandoned workshop. Bellwether did what small towns sometimes do when reminded of their better selves: people showed up. The high school football coach painted walls. Retired teachers baked pies. A hardware store donated fixtures. Even my mother, who had barely spoken to me since Dad's funeral because grief had made us both stubborn, arrived one morning carrying sandwiches. She hugged me beside a stack of lumber and said, "Your father would be proud you came home." That was the moment I finally cried. Winter softened into spring. The Bluebird Bakery reopened beneath a freshly painted sign, and customers lined the sidewalk on opening day. Curtis's family withdrew their purchase offer after the town council rejected the resort rezoning proposal, but by then he had become almost irrelevant to Eloan's story. Healing, I learned, rarely arrives as a dramatic victory over the person who hurt you. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when you realize you no longer check the door to see if they're coming back. Eloan laughed more. She started a small design studio above the bakery. I reopened my father's carpentry shop and began restoring historic homes around the county. And somewhere between early morning coffee, paint-stained clothes, and long drives along the river, our 3-hour marriage became a real love neither of us had planned. But I was still afraid. One evening, Eloan found a letter on my workbench offering me a lucrative restoration contract in Portland. I had accepted it without telling her. Not because I wanted to leave, but because some wounded part of me still believed happiness was temporary, and I wanted to escape before she could choose someone else. She didn't shout. She only said, "I thought you knew by now that leaving first doesn't hurt less." Then she walked away. I sat alone in my father's workshop until midnight, surrounded by tools he had held for 40 years, and understood the final lesson he had left me. Love wasn't the absence of fear. Love was deciding that someone mattered more than your instinct to run. The next morning, I declined the contract. Not for Eloan alone, but because Bellwether had become home again, and I was tired of confusing distance with freedom. I found her beside the river where I had finally scattered my father's ashes. I told her I couldn't promise perfection. I couldn't promise never to be afraid. But I could promise to stay honest, to keep showing up, and never again make her guess whether she was loved. Eloan looked at me through tears and said, "That sounds better than perfect." Then she kissed me beneath the cottonwood trees while the river carried the last pieces of winter downstream. If this story touched your heart, please support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with someone special, and subscribing to Dream Porch Tales for more emotional romance stories about love, healing, and second chances. Every bit of support helps us continue bringing heartfelt stories like this to you. 1 year later, on a bright autumn afternoon, Eloan and I boarded the same train route where we had first met. June came with us. So did my mother, half the town, and a conductor who kept pretending not to notice everyone crying. Near the exact stretch of track where Eloan had once taken my hand out of fear, I took hers out of love. I slipped a simple ring onto her finger and asked if she would be my wife, not for 3 hours, not until the next station, but for every ordinary morning and difficult season we were lucky enough to share. And just before we reached the end, if you believe true love can appear when least expected, comment, "Love still finds a way." Eloan said yes. Months later, we married in the courtyard behind the Bluebird Bakery, beneath strings of white lights and the old maple tree my father once helped June plant. There were no luxury hotels, no grand ballroom, no perfect fairy tale promises. Just family, neighbors, warm bread, happy tears, and 2 people who had learned that second chances rarely arrive looking the way we imagine. Sometimes they sit beside you on a train when your heart is carrying more grief than hope. Sometimes they take your hand before they know your story. And sometimes the person who asks you to pretend for 3 hours becomes the one person you never want to live without.